Hi, I'm Crystal. I really like watercolor, and so I did a little experiment with 11 different kinds of paper to see which ones would really stand up to water. So I've got some punched shapes that have been soaking in tap water for 32 days, and I want to see which ones kept their shape, which ones can dry out and still do what they're supposed to do, and see what makes a difference. Which ones can I just really get messy with and still use? And so watercolor paper and craft paper in general is generally separated based on the cotton content and the weight. And the weight that's labeled is the weight of 500 full sheets, which is much larger than a piece of paper you would ever buy as a consumer. And it's measured in pounds per ream of 500 sheets. So 90-pound paper weighs 90 pounds for 500 full sheets, and so forth. The other thing that makes a big difference is sizing. And so sizing is frequently made of gelatin. So if you are vegetarian or vegan for religious reasons, or if you're avoiding beef or pork, you might want to check out worldofvegan.com for a list of vegan art supplies so that you can avoid those products in your art supplies as well. So the other thing that I've learned about watercolor paper and sizing in general is that detergent will break down that sizing. So you definitely want to rinse your brush and your hands well. So the copy paper turned to mush, no great surprise there. My husband and I don't shred. We soak our waste personal information in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid on. But the Heavystock split into 2 layers, and that was a little bit surprising. I didn't realize that was multiple layers of paper until this experiment, so I learned something every day. You'll be able to see the names much better as we get to the next phase. The last 3 items were the ones that kept floating. The floaters were the Strathmore watercolor paper, which floated for 15 days, the Arteza watercolor paper, and American Crafts Vicki Boutin mixed media paper, which floated until the very end, all 32 days. So I don't know what the sizing is on that paper, but obviously it's sized both internally and externally. It's very impressive. So next I'm going to make sure that the paper samples are all completely dry, and I'm going to match them up with the piece that I cut the sample out of originally, so I can see if having been submerged in water for a month makes any difference to the paper. And I am using, like I said, 11 different kinds. It's 2 mixed media papers, 4 watercolor papers, 3 craft papers not really intended for a lot of water, 1 copy paper, and 1 resume paper, which is 32-pound 100% cotton bond, which I have left from my long ago days of actually using paper resumes. So once everything is crunchy dry, we're going to move on to testing how it stands up to a couple of different mediums, both the waterlogged sample and the original sample that it was cut from. So I'm going to use watercolor paint, and this is the watercolor that I'm applying right here, and that was fine. And after the watercolor, we're going to move on to a Zig Brush Marker. The Zig Brush Marker was also unremarkable. It seemed to be fine on all of the samples. It worked just the same on the formerly waterlogged sample as well as the original. And next I'm going to try an alcohol marker. I'm not a Copic color person, so this is a Sharpie alcohol marker. But again, it worked just fine on every single sample. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. So the other thing that makes a difference to me is the texture of the paper. So frequently I stamp, and for stamping you really want a nice smooth texture to the paper. And a lot of times that's a problem with watercolor paper, which has a high tooth. And so I'm just feeling each of these to see. The Bristol and Heavystock are smooth, but also the Dylusions mixed media and the American Crafts Vicki Boutin are very smooth papers. And the highest tooth, no surprise, are the Strathmore watercolor paper and Arteza watercolor paper. So my conclusion is that I'm going to use the paper that I have first, which is probably a lifetime supply. But if I go shopping again, it's going to be Dylusions or Vicki Boutin. Thanks for joining me today.